Hey, what's going on, everybody? Coach Williams here, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Place, where our mission is to take you on a journey from hurting to healing by helping you identify your trauma, communicate it to a trusted individual, and embracing yourself for who God created you to be. In this last episode, we talked about the overview of my ICE framework: identify, communicate, and embrace. And today, we're going to talk about how to identify your trauma and the importance of identifying your trauma. Y'all tap in. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and please take your pen out and your journal out, because today, you're about to learn the importance of identifying your trauma. To reality, to life, to reality. Y'all, I'm super excited to announce the release of my new book on April 9th, 2026, called From Hurting to Healing, the offensive playbook on healing from trauma. If you haven't pre-ordered it already, make sure you go onto my site, coachwilliamsu.com, coachwilliamsu.com. Make sure you pre-order this so you can be one of the first people to receive this book. For today's episode, I'm going to read an excerpt out of this book. So here we go. In 2022, Chandra and I stayed in an apartment in Bedford, Texas. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into our garage and smelled a horrible stench, but I could not figure out what it was. I knew it was something dead, so I immediately started looking for squirrels, raccoons, possums, and anything else that could produce such a foul stench. Later that evening, we went to run some errands, and when we got out of the car, the smell was still there. I began to think, how is this smell following us? Turns out that the smell was coming from underneath her hood. And so I was like, what is this? And so I popped the hood and I started inspecting and investigating, and I noticed that it was a dead pigeon underneath her motor. I know you're wondering how a pigeon got underneath her motor. Yeah, me too. But the good news is that I was able to take it to a tire shop so they could lift the car up, and then they popped the plate at the bottom of her car and they removed the pigeon from underneath her car. And when they uncovered the pigeon, it filled up their workspace so bad that everybody had to stop working and go out and get a breath of fresh air. The hurt in your life is just like this foul smell. It follows you everywhere you go and sometimes can be hard to identify. You find yourself wondering, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel this way? Why do I not know my purpose? Why are my relationships so unhealthy? Why am I not where I want to be in life? Why does loss keep showing up in my story? You slowly begin to accept the narrative you slowly begin accepting a narrative of yourself that is based on hurt because you are unable to identify why the foul stench of hurt is following you wherever you go. Here's the secret right here, though, y'all. You are not the reason your life is producing a foul stench. Your trauma is. There's nothing wrong with you. Your trauma is producing a stench, and that stench is following you wherever you go. Your trauma has been dead, buried beneath other life events that you wouldn't even think to search. It follows you wherever you go and can be smelled through your actions. You are asking all of those soul-searching questions when the truth of the matter is that you have buried a trauma so deep in your brain that you do not even realize that it is producing unwanted actions and unwanted situations. So by identifying your trauma, you are revealing your healing. Do not avoid that secret that you haven't told anyone, because what lies underneath that secret is a life unimaginable. Y'all, I know there was a lot. So let me break this down in 3 points for you. Point number one: every fruit has a root. What you mean, Cordarius? What you mean, Coach, every fruit has a root? When you think about an apple tree, where does the apple come from? The branch, right? The branch comes from the what? The tree. The tree comes from the what? Seed. Here's what you got to understand about a seed. Once you plant the seed underneath the soil, the seed actually grows down before it grows up. What you mean it grows down before it grows up? When you plant a seed underneath the soil, before the tree ever comes up, it grows roots down in the dark where nobody is seeing. It forms the proper nutrients. It attaches to the other trees. It soaks up from the soil what it needs so it can nourish the tree. And once the roots do that, now the tree grows up. And as the roots continue to give life to the tree now produces fruit that we call apple. The apple doesn't get here, the fruit doesn't get here without the root. And I think somewhere in life we forget that. We forget that every fruit has a root, and we start identifying behavior instead of identifying where the behavior came from. And sort of like that dead pigeon in the story, right? I could have said that this smell was anything. That smell could have been anything. But once I took it upon myself to look underneath the hood, to really investigate, why does it smell so bad? If I would have never done that, I would have never identified the smell. I would have never noticed the dead pigeon. And everywhere I went, that smell would have followed me. Your actions are the same way. You're wondering why you have an attitude all of the time. You're wondering why you've been divorced a few times. You're wondering why you go from job to job. You're wondering why your emotions are all over the place. And you're wondering how you could change your life. You change your life by identifying the root instead of addressing the fruit. It's a chronological order to this. You can't deal with the actions until you deal with the thing, the trauma that's producing the actions. The reason why it's hard for you to be in relationships with men is because your dad wasn't here and you don't know how a real man look. And now you're angry at your dad for not being there. You're angry at your dad because he made all of these empty promises to take you places and he never showed up. And so now you're taking that anger that you have for your dad out on other men. You may be wondering, why can I not remain faithful to her in this relationship? You can't remain faithful in the relationship because the root of the issue is that you didn't have that man in your life to teach you how to be faithful in said relationship. And so instead of beating yourself up about not being able to be faithful or not being able to stay in a relationship, you have to attack the root. And the root cause is the trauma of not having a male figure in the household. Now, when you identify that as a root, then you can create a plan to address the fruit. And now your fruit becomes pure. Now your fruit becomes better, more digestible. More people want to be around you. More people want to pick from you. Every fruit has a root. Point number 2, when you bury a trauma, it takes roots in your brain and it produces undesired things in your life. When you bury a trauma, it creates roots in your brain. Remember point number 1, every fruit has a what? Root. Everybody put root in the comment section. Every fruit has a root. Well, when you bury a trauma, that buried trauma then becomes a seed and you bury it in the depths of your mind. You have 3 levels of your brain that you don't know about. The first level I like to call your conscious mind. The second level is your subconscious. The third level is your unconscious mind. Your conscious mind are your active thoughts. For an example, don't say this out loud, but what color is my shirt? You thought black. That's your conscious mind. That's also the mind that God speaks to. Well, how do I know if it's God or Satan? Well, that depends on your heart. It's Satan if it draws you away from God. It's God if it pulls you closer to God, the voice in your head is. The second level is your subconscious. You see, this is where you bury your trauma. You bury it in your subconscious level, but what you need to understand is that the subconscious level of your brain actually fuels the conscience. So in your subconscious are the roots to the thoughts in your consciousness. I'm talking about the thoughts that when you lay your head down on the pillow before you go to sleep and you start crying and you don't tell nobody those thoughts, that's what I'm talking about. Your subconscious is actually fueling your conscious mind, and your unconscious mind are the dead thoughts. You don't even remember them. When you bury your trauma so deep, that's where they live. Regardless if they're in your subconscious or your unconscious mind, they're creating roots. And like I told you in the last point, the roots are the very thing that fuels the fruit. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying today? And so your attitude is so stanky because your root is contaminated. You're rooted to the wrong thing. And you have buried your trauma, and your trauma is not meant to be buried. That's why you are depressed. You are pressed underneath something. You're not created to be depressed. You're created to express, which is the next episode. I'm going to teach you how to communicate, how to express your trauma. Because you've buried your trauma, it has turned into roots, and now you have stinky attitudes and you have undesirable outcomes in your life. Now, what happened to you is not your fault. However, it is up to you to express what has happened to you so you can properly heal. I cannot express to you enough how my life totally changed when I stopped burying my trauma. I buried my sexual abuse for 2 decades, 20 years. I didn't tell anybody. The moment that I decided to express myself and create roots elsewhere, my life changed. Point number 3, identifying your trauma draws you closer to God. Y'all, I am a firm believer that the gap in your relationship, in the relationship between you and God, is trauma. You see, growing up, we see God as our creator, as the Almighty, which He is. But that's not the only thing He is. Not only is God your creator, God is also your healer. God is also your father. Father in Hebrew is Abba. Abba means father. That's a quality of God that a lot of us don't ever experience because we place all of our mentality and mindset on God, the creator, who can send me to heaven or hell. That is 100% true. And He also wants to be your father. And we see that all throughout the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And because God desires to be our father, Satan, the hater, comes and tries to distract us from seeing God as our father, from seeing God as the person who hugs me when I'm crying, as my comforter, as the one who loves me. You see, because our perception of God is tainted by trauma. And most of the trauma in your life has happened at the expense of your parents. That's why most trauma don't get talked about, because when we're teenage kids, what happens in my house stays in my house. And so now we can't talk about the impact of our dad going to bed drunk. We can't talk about the impact of domestic violence. We can't talk about the impact of our dad dying. We can't talk about the impact of the divorce between our mom and our dad because it's so gruesome, and they're working in a church. And so if we expose them, that's going to expose their role in the church. But shouldn't it though? Why should I have to keep my story a secret to keep somebody's character intact? Their character is not my responsibility. That's between them and God. And if what they did impacted me in a negative light, and if it's my story, I have the right to tell it. You see, and we never talk about the harm that parents do in our lives. But the problem with that is that our parents have done so much hurt that it has impacted our view of Abba. So now we think that our father is a God with a checklist ready to beat us when we do wrong. That's not the God I read about in the Bible. Now we think God is somebody that's mad at us because we didn't do all of our chores. We think that God is somebody that's mad at us, and we see God as this angry James Earl Jones version from heaven. I am not pleased with you type stuff. And that's really not who God is. And when I identified my trauma, when I identified the impact that my trauma had on me, when I identified that the fact that I was essayed led to me being promiscuous, led to me being a hoe, led to me sleeping around, that poured into my marriage and my mindset. And that kept me from being close to God. I'm not trauma blaming. I'm telling you, Satan sent that trauma to give you a distorted view of God. And until you identify that trauma, you will never get the bigger picture that God is. And so it's important for you to heal from your trauma so you can have a better relationship with your Abba Father, God, who's in heaven. Whew, man, that was a lot of information. In this episode, you learned that every fruit has a root. You learned that when you bury your trauma, it actually creates roots in your brain that produces undesired things in your life. You learned today that by identifying your trauma actually draws you closer to God. If you found this information to be beneficial, just send it to somebody who you love. Send it to them with your notes with an explanation of why they need to listen to this. Thank you guys again for tuning in to another episode of The Healing Place. Don't forget to like it. You've been commenting already. Make sure you subscribe because we're going to have more content dropping like this. My name is Coach Williams, and thank you for allowing me to be your mentor on your journey from hurting to healing.